Hasidic and mystical teachings gives a metaphor of a teacher teaching a student. Rav and Talmud, as it's called. And the metaphor is in two ways that the teacher teaches. One is, of course, the teacher, our teacher is the Alter Rebbe, or our teacher, our Rebbe, talking about, the ultimate in teachers. What they know and what they give over is two different things. Because what they know, if they gave that over, what would happen? It'd be too much. It'd be like when David gives me coffee, it's like he would be pouring from a barrel into this cup. Cup would just splatter all over. It would splatter all over. That's what would happen. Because from a barrel to a cup, right? The Rebbe's teachings, his knowledge rather, and what he knows, that barrel is so full. Pour it into the cup. No. So what has to happen? It has to be a tzimtzum, a contraction on it in order that you can fill up a measly cup, a Yiddish cup, right? That's called tzimtzum, contraction. Then there is when the teacher is teaching and gives a metaphor. The metaphor is not a contraction on the idea, it's a concealment on the idea that is being taught. In other words, concealed in there is every bit of knowledge that's in the barrel, but it's concealed, as is, right? The metaphor has a lot, and therefore, you can, but it's concealed. It's not contracted. Welcome to Tanya Today. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zichron Kadesh in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. We continue in chapter 38. And what we are now bringing into the discussion is kavana, intent. Intent, mindfulness, a heart that's focused on the mitzvah that we are engaged in. So we're engaged in the mitzvah right now, study of Torah. And of course, we need to be mindful in the teachings itself, but there needs to be also kavana, intent. What am I doing? What is this about? Right? Actually, learning Torah might not be the good example. The good example is when you're being charitable. Being charitable is a mere act of taking money and giving it. And in that act, what we've learned is a divine connection. Whether you're mindful, whether you have intent or not, you've done a mitzvah. Likewise, if you put on your tefillin and you know that it's God's desire that you put on the tefillin, but you're not really thinking about that it's against your heart and the seat of the mind, and it's connecting the heart and the mind to work in unison with God. You're not mindful of that or either think it or whatever. Did you do the mitzvah? Absolutely. Because in the act, there's the connection. That's the uniqueness. But in this chapter, we're adding that, that's good, but not sufficient. It's a connection, but not a whole, complete connection. You need intent, kavana, an awareness, a mindfulness in the act that you're doing. And the metaphor that we gave before is the distinction between doing a mitzvah that is just the act is like a body. Doing a mitzvah that's with an act, with the kavanah, with the intent, with the mindfulness, the awareness, and the heartfelt connection is like a body that's animated by a soul. Right? That's the metaphor. Now, in this metaphor of body and soul, we're going to take a brief, deeper look into it. A deeper look. When we speak about the soul here, we're not talking about the divine soul, we're talking about the animating soul of the person, right? So the animating soul of the person and the body of the person, do they conceal God? Absolutely. Right? They conceal God. They're both animated by klipas noiga. Right? It's a klipa, shell. A shell conceals, right? The peel of the orange conceals the orange. We know that it's in there, but we don't see it. Shell's covering it. The walnut shell is covering on the walnut inside. So both body and soul are animated by God. But they're animated by God, by klipas noiga, both conceal on God. They're both concealing on God. Right? That's clear. They both hide God. Meaning, second, that's called Hester, concealment. However, in that concealment, not all concealments are equal. They're equal in the sense that they are both animated from klipas noiga, but in that itself, the tzimtzum, the contraction, is different. The contraction is different. The contraction of the light of God is different. The contraction of the light of God as it is in the body is much more so. And therefore, what do you have in its creation from the divine light? The more it's contracted, therefore, you have a body that comes out which is lifeless. It's a physical body. The animating soul, on the other hand, is also the light of God is contracted in order to create it. But its contraction is less. And that's why it's a living being, right? A body's not a living being, right? Not a living being. It's the soul that gives life to the body, right? Both of them are creations of God. Both of them hide, conceal, Hester, on God. But the contraction is very different one from the other. Again, the body, the contraction of the divine light is so great that it becomes an inanimate physical being. The contraction on the light that gives life to the vital soul is not as much, and therefore it's a living entity, more vibrant, right? Let's give another metaphor to appreciate this. What does it mean, the difference between concealment and contraction? So I'm going to give metaphor. So concealment, an equal concealment is when you put a curtain in your house, you're concealing the light that comes in. The light that comes in to your house is not the same light as outside, right? It's concealing it so much so And if you put, a very thick curtain, a very dark curtain, the minimal light that comes through, only because there's sunlight, right? That that it's the sun. But if you were to know that, there's no way that you would be able to confirm. Maybe it's not the sunlight. Maybe it's a big beam of light. You don't know that. The point being, it's concealing it, that you don't know of its reality. Again, it's only because we have experience of the day before, right? And we were outside before that. And so, right? But we're using this by way of metaphor. That's what it's important to appreciate, right? It's so concealing, right? That's equally concealing, meaning God's presence for the body and soul. Because when you look at body and soul, they both conceal in God. Again, we're talking about the animating soul, right? Both conceal. Now, at the same time, if you took a board, plywood, and you drilled a hole, a small hole, this big, so you're contracting a lot of the light, but it's the light itself coming through. If the hole was this big, it'd be a lot more light, right? That's contraction. This is more contracted, less contracted. So at the same time, we have a curtain that conceals the light of God in animating, right, the body and soul here, because we're using this by way of metaphor, right? This is a metaphor for the metaphor, right? Because the body and soul is a metaphor for doing a mitzvah without intent and doing a mitzvah with intent, right? So the contraction of more or less, right? The bigger hole in the wood and the plywood means lesser light coming, greater light or lesser light, but it's the light itself, right? Right? It's not concealed in the same manner. But both things are happening at the same time in creation, right? And in creation, both things are happening, but they're two different elements over here, right? Two different elements, right? So the body is getting that small little hole, right? The animating soul is getting a bigger hole, right? And both at the same time are getting the curtain. Yeah. Right? They both equally get the same curtain because they're both equally concealing on the countenance of God, that it's coming from God's holiness. And therefore, what's on the other side is klipas noiga, right? It's klipa, the shell. It's covering, concealing. The other metaphor is the teacher who's teaching the student. The Alter Rebbe is teaching us. He teaches us in two different ways. One is he contracts what he knows, the barrel of his wisdom, and he's putting into our little cup. By the way, in Yiddish, cup means head. He's putting into our little cup, right? He has to contract on what he knows so much. He gives us a little morsel. Because if he gave us like this, it would be way too much for us to, right? It'd be taking from the barrel, pouring into here, it would just overflow and just everything would spill out. At the same time, the Alter Rebbe is also teaching us by way of metaphor. Metaphor is a concealment of his wisdom, right? In the metaphor is concealed, right, the message. You have to take it apart. And by taking it apart, you unravel it. But in the metaphor itself, it's concealed. You have to take out from it in order to unconceal it, right? But in the metaphor, it's concealed the wisdom. It's another metaphor, right? To bring out the metaphor. Yeah. And that's it for today. That's only to bring out, the difference. And where are we going with this? To appreciate the difference between doing a mitzvah, just do it, just Jew it, meaning the act, which the act itself is a divine connection. Absolutely. But metaphorically, of course, it's contracted much more so, that light, as opposed to a greater light when you do it with kavanah, with intent. That's where we're going. And for that, we're going to have to wait. L'chaim, do we have any questions? Any questions, any comments? Just a reminder to everybody, whoever can go on YouTube and watch these classes, that will help our efforts to move forward and to be what's the word? Well, first of all, monetization, which we need. So I want to actually thank a bunch of you that do help out. A bunch of you do help out on a monthly basis and regular basis. It's really appreciated. And by going into YouTube, that will help out. All right, thank you. I don't see any questions I miss. Is it Davida and Liba's birthday today? Is that I quickly did I miss that? Yes, it was Alyssa's birthday. All right. Oh, why don't you speak up, ladies? Twin sisters, twins that study Tanya together will always be together. Especially they don't just study Tanya, they study everything with us. Mazel tov, mazel tov. Hebrew birthday today, beautiful. Thank you, Patricia. That's very kind of you. Wow. Okay, I don't see any questions. Oh, Brett has a question. Where is Brett's question? Did I miss it? Oh, okay. If we continue with the metaphor of light, as light diffracts into different wavelengths, colors, do we at times see fragments of God's light? I mean, light is God's light. It's all God's, right? So I'm not exactly what you mean, God, do we see God's light? Is this cup God's? Everything is God's, right? That's the question is, how is God animating this right now? So normally he animates klipas noiga, right? Which means an admixture of good and bad. And therefore, this could be used for good or for bad. But this is David's coffee that we use only for good and elevate it to give us greater focus. Look at that. We're out of coffee. Ay, ay, ay. Okay. That gives us greater focus in our learning. So elevating it. So everything is animated by God. The question is just, what is the form of animation? What we're trying to do is to take everything, and that's where we're going with what we did actually till the end of chapter 37, is that we're trying to take everything in the material world and elevate it by using it towards a mitzvah. So this coffee is elevated through the Tanya. Why? Because this gave me greater focus, greater capability of teaching. So it's also elevated, right? So I'm not certain what you mean by, the fragments of God's light and what you mean by that. Okay. L'chaim with coffee, yes. That's what we do during it. All right, folks, I don't see any. You have a question? David, go ahead. It's exactly where we're going. That's exactly where we're going. That's intent. That's kavanah. Exactly. That's exactly where we're going. Okay. But stay tuned. Excellent. All right, folks. Rambam is coming up. You don't want to miss it. Rabbi Ronnie Fine coming to you for Chabad Zich and Kadesh in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure.